Detroit winters bite with particular cruelty. On this January morning, with temperatures hovering at 12 degrees, Miguel Reyes pulled his worn Carhartt jacket tighter as he entered the abandoned Victorian on Trumbull Avenue. Built in 1892, the three-story structure had stood vacant for nearly 2 decades, another casualty of the city's economic decline. Now, as part of Detroit's neighborhood revitalization initiative, Miguel's construction crew had been contracted to gut and renovate the interior. "This place gives me the creeps," said Darnell, Miguel's assistant foreman, his breath visible in the frigid air. The house had no electricity yet, and weak sunlight filtered through boarded windows, casting long shadows across peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceilings. "It's just an old house," Miguel replied, though he couldn't shake the uncomfortable weight that seemed to press against his chest since stepping inside. At 47, he'd renovated dozens of abandoned properties across Detroit, but something about this Victorian felt different, oppressive, as if the walls themselves were watching. "Let's start with the dining room wall," Miguel instructed the crew of 5 men. According to the blueprints, there used to be a connecting room that was sealed off during the 1940s renovation. "We need to open it back up." The youngest carpenter, Tyler, a 24-year-old with tattoo sleeves and perpetual nervous energy, pointed his flashlight at the wall in question. "You think we'll find anything cool behind there? I heard stories about these old Detroit mansions, people hiding valuables during the Depression." Darnell laughed. "More likely asbestos and rat droppings." "Either way, we're about to find out," Miguel said, picking up a sledgehammer. "Let's knock this thing down." The first blow sent a shower of plaster dust into the air. The second revealed wooden lath beneath. By the third strike, Miguel paused, frowning at a peculiar odor that hadn't been present before, sickly sweet with undertones of decay. "You smell that?" Tyler asked, covering his nose with his sleeve. Miguel nodded, striking the wall again. As chunks of plaster fell away, the smell intensified. Behind him, Darnell switched on a battery-powered work lamp, illuminating the growing hole. "There's something back there," Tyler said, leaning forward. Miguel widened the opening with his pry bar. The wall was thicker than he'd expected, nearly 16 inches deep, with an unusual construction. Plaster, then wooden boards, then another layer of plaster. As he pulled away a section of interior board, his flashlight beam caught something that made him recoil. "Jesus Christ!" He stumbled backward, dropping his tools with a clatter. There, sealed within the wall cavity, was a human hand, desiccated, partially mummified, fingers splayed as if reaching out. Darnell pushed forward, his expression shifting from curiosity to horror. "Is that what I think it is?" Miguel could only nod, his heart hammering against his ribs. As the beam of his flashlight traveled upward, they could see that the hand was attached to an arm, the arm to a shoulder, and the shoulder to the twisted remains of what had once been a human being, entombed within the wall. But what caused the 5 men to back away, a chorus of muttered prayers and curses rising between them, wasn't just the discovery of human remains. It was the realization that there wasn't just one body in the wall. There were several, and some of the withered faces seemed to be frozen in silent screams. Detective Layla Harrison had seen plenty of disturbing crime scenes in her 15 years with Detroit PD, but nothing quite like this. The Victorian on Trumbull Avenue was now surrounded by police vehicles, their lights painting the snow-covered street in alternating flashes of red and blue. Crime scene technicians moved carefully through the house, photographing and documenting every detail of the grisly discovery. 6 bodies so far," said the medical examiner, Dr. Powell, his face grim beneath his protective mask. "All adults. Preliminary estimate puts time of death between 70 and 80 years ago, based on clothing fragments and decomposition state." Layla jotted notes in her small black notebook. "Any ID on the victims?" "Not yet. But there's something unusual about how they were placed in the wall." Dr. Powell gestured for her to look closer. Layla stepped forward, careful not to disturb the scene. What had initially appeared to be random placement now revealed itself as deliberate arrangement. The bodies had been positioned to face each other, arms intertwined in places, as if caught in a macabre dance. They weren't just hidden, Dr. Powell continued. They were displayed for someone's private viewing. The wall was constructed around them with this small viewing panel. He pointed to a narrow, rectangular opening in the inner wall that had been sealed with a wooden panel, a window into the tomb that had remained hidden for decades. A chill that had nothing to do with the January cold ran through Layla. So someone built a secret viewing port to look at their victims. Exactly, and there's more. Dr. Powell handed her a pair of tweezers holding a small, tarnished object. We found this embedded in one victim's clothing. There are similar ones on the others. Layla examined it under her flashlight. It was a coin-sized metal disc with a symbol etched into its surface, a circle containing what appeared to be an eye above a pyramid. "Any idea what this represents?" she asked. "Not my department," Dr. Powell replied, "but whatever happened here went beyond simple murder." Outside, Layla found the construction crew huddled near an ambulance, shock blankets draped over their shoulders. The foreman, Miguel Reyes, stood slightly apart, speaking quietly with another detective. "Mr. Reyes," Layla approached, extending her hand. "Detective Harrison, I understand you were first to discover the remains?" Miguel nodded, his face ashen. "Never seen anything like it. The way they were positioned, it wasn't natural. Did you notice anything else unusual before breaking through the wall? Any signs the house might contain something like this?" Miguel hesitated. "The house felt wrong from the moment we walked in. I've worked on dozens of old buildings, and they all have their quirks. But this place—" He shook his head. "My grandmother would have said it was inhabited by something dark." "Anything specific?" "The cold, for one thing. It was colder inside than out, even accounting for lack of heating and sounds, creaking and tapping that couldn't be explained by settling. The youngest guy on my crew, Tyler, swore he heard whispering." Layla made a note, though she'd learned to separate potential evidence from the psychological effects of discovering something horrific. People often retroactively assigned meaning to ordinary details. "One more thing," Miguel added, lowering his voice. "After we found the bodies and called 911, I went to wait outside. That's when I noticed the basement window." He pointed toward a narrow, ground-level window, partially obscured by overgrown shrubs. "I swear I saw someone watching us, just for a second. A pale face. I thought it might be a squatter, so I told the first officers who arrived, but they searched the basement and found nothing." Layla felt that chill again. "Thank you, Mr. Reyes. We'll need you and your crew to provide formal statements, but you've been very helpful." As Miguel walked away, Layla turned back toward the house. In the gathering darkness, its windows seemed to watch her with malevolent intent. She'd investigated hundreds of crime scenes without allowing them to affect her emotionally. But something about this case, these bodies arranged in their hidden tomb, on display for some unknown observer, felt uniquely disturbing. And despite her rational mind dismissing the notion, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened in this house 70 years ago wasn't finished. The Detroit Public Library's archive room smelled of old paper and dust. Layla sat at a wooden table, surrounded by stacks of microfiche records, property deeds, and yellowed newspaper clippings. 3 days had passed since the discovery on Trumbull Avenue, and the case had already begun consuming her waking hours. "Here's everything I could find on 1837 Trumbull," said Barbara Winters, the elderly archivist who had been helping Layla navigate the library's extensive records. She placed another folder on the table. Property records, newspaper mentions, and some photographs from the Historical Society. "Thank you," Layla said, already opening the folder. The preliminary autopsy report had confirmed what Dr. Powell suspected. The victims had died between 1942 and 1945, based on clothing fibers, deterioration patterns, and a partial newspaper fragment found with one body. All had died from asphyxiation, though several showed evidence of prolonged captivity before death. The metal discs found on each victim had been sent to the FBI's symbology unit for analysis. Meanwhile, Layla was tracing the house's ownership history, looking for anyone connected to the property during the early 1940s. The first photograph in the folder showed the house in its prime, an elegant Victorian with ornate trim and a wraparound porch. The caption read, "Home of Dr. Edwin Merritt, prominent physician and philanthropist, 1938. Layla pulled out her notebook. Dr. Edwin Merritt. The name matched the property deed from 1931 to 1953. According to the records, Merritt had been a respected surgeon at Detroit Receiving Hospital who later established a private practice from his home, specializing in experimental treatments for terminal patients. A newspaper clipping from 1939 featured Merritt receiving an award for his charitable work, providing free medical care to Detroit's poorest residents during the Depression. The black and white photograph showed a distinguished-looking man in his 50s with round glasses and a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Did you find something?" Barbara asked, noting Layla's intense focus. "Maybe. What do you know about Dr. Edwin Merritt?" Barbara's expression changed subtly. "That's a name I haven't heard in years. He was quite famous in Detroit medical circles before the scandal." "Scandal?" Barbara nodded, lowering her voice despite the empty room. "In late 1945, several of his patients disappeared. There was an investigation, but nothing was ever proven. Merritt claimed they had simply relocated during the post-war migration. Eventually, the investigation was dropped, but his reputation never recovered. He died in 1953. Suicide, according to rumors." Layla felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the sensation of puzzle pieces beginning to align. What happened to the house after his death? It passed to his daughter, Eliza Merritt. She never lived there, kept it boarded up until her own death in the 1980s. After that, it changed hands several times before being abandoned during the foreclosure crisis. Layla jotted down Eliza Merritt's name. "Is there any record of what happened to her?" Barbara disappeared into the stacks, returning minutes later with a thin file. "Eliza Merritt never married. Worked as a nurse at the same hospital as her father. After his death, she became something of a recluse, living in a small apartment in Corktown. Died in 1987, age 74. Layla opened the file and found herself staring at a photograph of a severe-looking woman with thin lips and her father's same cold eyes. But what caught Layla's attention was the small pin on Eliza's nurse's uniform, a circle containing what appeared to be an eye above a pyramid. "Barbara, do you recognize this symbol?" Layla pointed to the pin. The archivist squinted through her reading glasses. "I believe that was the emblem of a medical society Dr. Merritt founded, the Enlightened Healers Circle. A small group of doctors and nurses who practiced what they called transcendent medicine. There were rumors they performed experimental procedures, particularly on terminal patients, but nothing was ever proven." Layla photographed the image with her phone. "Is there anything about what kind of transcendent medicine they practiced?" "Nothing official, but—" Barbara hesitated. "My aunt worked as a nurse at Detroit Receiving during that era. She refused to speak about Dr. Merritt directly, but once mentioned that some doctors believed suffering was the path to enlightenment, that the human body revealed medical secrets only in extremis." A chill settled over Layla as the implications became clear. "Is your aunt still alive?" Barbara shook her head. "She passed 20 years ago, but she left journals. If they contain anything about Merritt or his medical society, you're welcome to read them." "I'd appreciate that." Layla gathered her notes, pieces of the narrative forming in her mind. Dr. Edwin Merritt, respected physician by day, perhaps something much darker in private. A secret medical society. Patients who disappeared. Bodies arranged in a macabre display behind a wall with a viewing port. As she prepared to leave, Barbara touched her arm. "Detective, There's one more thing you should know about Dr. Merritt's house. After his death, several construction workers hired to renovate the property reported strange experiences: voices, unexplained cold spots, tools moving on their own. Eventually, the work was abandoned. Some said the house rejected changes, as if something inside wanted to preserve what had happened there. Layla managed a polite smile. "Thank you, Barbara, but I deal in evidence, not ghost stories." Yet as she drove back toward Trumbull Avenue for another look at the crime scene, Layla couldn't dismiss the construction foreman's words from her mind. The house felt wrong from the moment we walked in. The evening sky had darkened to indigo by the time Layla returned to 1837 Trumbull. Yellow crime scene tape still cordoned off the property, fluttering in the bitter January wind. She signed the access log with the uniformed officer stationed outside, then entered the silent house, flashlight in hand. The bodies had been removed, but the wall remained partially open, its jagged edges like a wound in the faded floral wallpaper. Forensic markers still dotted the scene, numbered evidence flags marking where each victim had been found. Layla moved carefully through the dining room, her flashlight beam revealing water stains on the ceiling and decades of grime on the hardwood floors. The library archivist's research had confirmed her suspicions. Dr. Edwin Merritt had likely used this house for something sinister under the guise of his medical practice. But Layla needed more concrete evidence connecting him to the bodies in the wall. She descended the creaking stairs to the basement, where Miguel Reyes claimed to have seen a face watching from the window. The temperature dropped noticeably as she reached the bottom step, her breath visible in the beam of her flashlight. The basement was unexpectedly large, extending beneath the entire footprint of the house, with a dirt floor in some sections and crumbling concrete in others. Rusted pipes hung from the ceiling, and the stone foundation walls were discolored with mineral deposits and age. Near the center stood an anomaly, a brick structure about 10 feet square, with a metal door resembling a vault or cold storage room. It wasn't marked on any of the house blueprints Layla had reviewed. She approached slowly, noting that the padlock on the door was relatively new compared to the surrounding structure. Someone had accessed this room recently. Drawing her service weapon as a precaution, Layla examined the lock. It was closed, but not actually secured. The hasp was through the latch, but unlocked. She removed the padlock, took a deep breath, and pulled the heavy door open. The smell that emerged was immediate and distinctive, antiseptic overlaid with the musty odor of long-abandoned medical equipment. Her flashlight revealed what appeared to be an underground operating room. A rusted examination table dominated the center, with leather restraints still attached to its corners. Glass-fronted cabinets lined one wall, containing dusty bottles of chemicals and surgical instruments. A drainage channel ran the perimeter of the floor, leading to a central drain beneath the table. "My God," Layla whispered, understanding dawning. This was where Dr. Merritt had conducted his experimental treatments, where the bodies found in the wall had likely met their end. She moved deeper into the room, photographing everything with her phone. On a small desk in the corner sat a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked with age, but somehow preserved in the cool, dry environment of the sealed room. Layla carefully opened it, revealing pages of handwritten notes in faded ink. The first entry was dated September 4, 1942. Subject 12 continues to resist the treatment protocol, requiring increased sedation. Despite this, physiological responses remain promising. The pain threshold extends further with each session, suggesting the boundary between corporeal suffering and transcendence may indeed be penetrable. E agrees that we are on the precipice of a breakthrough. Layla turned the pages, each entry more disturbing than the last. Dr. Merritt had been systematically torturing patients, whom he referred to only by numbers, under the guise of medical research, believing their suffering would reveal some kind of transcendent knowledge. The final entry, dated November 17, 1945, sent a chill through her. The culmination of our work approaches. Subjects 1217 have been prepared according to the ancient configuration. E has completed the necessary modifications to the viewing chamber. Tonight, at midnight, we will witness the threshold's opening. What lies beyond will transform medicine forever. Layla closed the journal, her hands trembling slightly despite her professional detachment. The E mentioned repeatedly was almost certainly Eliza Merritt, the doctor's daughter. Together, they had conducted unspeakable experiments on vulnerable patients, culminating in whatever twisted arrangement of bodies had been sealed in the wall. As she turned to leave with the journal as evidence, Layla's flashlight caught something on the back wall she hadn't noticed before. A symbol etched into the stone, the same symbol from the metal discs and Eliza's pin. A circle containing an eye above a pyramid. Below it, carved in smaller letters, "What is sealed between worlds can never truly die." A sudden gust of cold air extinguished her flashlight, plunging the room into absolute darkness. From somewhere above came the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving across the dining room floor, directly over the area where the bodies had been found. Layla reached for her phone's flashlight, her heart pounding. As light again filled the underground chamber, she caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of her eye. A figure in white, there and gone so quickly she couldn't be certain she'd seen anything at all. "Detroit police," she called out, weapon raised. "Identify yourself." Only silence answered. Layla backed toward the door, journal in one hand, gun in the other. The rational part of her mind suggested a squatter had taken refuge in the abandoned house, just as Miguel had suspected. But another part, a part that had seen the bodies arranged in their macabre display and read Merritt's disturbing journal, wondered if something more inexplicable was occurring. As she reached the doorway, her phone's flashlight flickered, then failed completely. In the second before darkness enveloped her again, Layla could have sworn she saw multiple figures standing silently around the examination table, figures in hospital gowns with hollow eyes and mouths frozen in silent screams. Morning light streamed through the windows of the Detroit Police Department's conference room as Layla arranged her evidence across the corkboard. Crime scene photos of the bodies in the wall, historical images of Dr. Edwin Merritt and his daughter Eliza, photocopies of key pages from Merritt's journal, property records showing the house's ownership history, and at the center a sketch of the recurring symbol, the eye above the pyramid within a circle. "You look like you haven't slept," said Detective Marcus Washington, her partner of 3 years, placing a coffee cup beside her notes. "Thanks for noticing," Layla replied dryly, though she appreciated the caffeine. Sleep had indeed eluded her after her experience in the basement room. She'd called for backup last night, and officers had searched the house thoroughly, finding no intruders. The power had been shut off for decades, and no explanation could be found for why both her flashlight and phone had failed simultaneously. Layla hadn't mentioned the figures she thought she'd seen around the examination table. Some details were better kept to herself, at least until she had rational explanations. "So what exactly are we looking at here?" Marcus asked, studying the board. "A doctor killing patients in the 1940s? That's more of a historical footnote than an active investigation." "It's connected to something current," Layla insisted. "The basement room had been accessed recently. The padlock was new, and someone was in that house when I was there yesterday." Before Marcus could respond, Layla's phone rang. It was Dr. Powell from the medical examiner's office. "Detective Harrison, we've identified 2 of the victims from dental records preserved in the state archives. Margaret Sullivan and Thomas Ridley both reported missing in October 1945. Both were patients of Dr. Edwin Merritt, diagnosed with terminal conditions." "So he was killing his own patients," Layla confirmed. "Yes, but there's something else. The FBI analysis of those metal discs came back. The symbol belongs to an obscure medical cult active in the early 20th century, the Enlightened Healers' Circle. They believed suffering revealed medical secrets inaccessible through conventional research. The last known chapter disbanded in 1953 after a scandal involving patient deaths. The same year Merritt committed suicide, Layla noted. What about the arrangement of the bodies? Any significance there? According to the FBI report, it matches a configuration described in the cult's private texts, something called the gateway alignment. They believe properly positioned bodies created a doorway between worlds, allowing practitioners to access divine medical knowledge. Layla felt a chill despite the heated room. "Thank you, Doctor. Please send me the full report." After hanging up, she turned to Marcus. "We need to look into any recent cases involving missing persons with medical conditions, particularly terminal diagnoses." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You think someone's copying Merritt's work after all this time?" "I think the discovery of those bodies wasn't an accident," Layla said, remembering Miguel's comment about the house feeling wrong from the start. The renovation plan specifically targeted that wall after decades of the house sitting untouched. She pulled up a file on her laptop. The property was purchased 6 months ago by Trumbull Restoration LLC, which traces back to a holding company called Asclepius Investments. Their corporate logo? A modernized version of the Iron Pyramid. Marcus let out a low whistle. "You think this medical cult is still active?" "Or a new iteration of it," Layla confirmed, "and I think they wanted those bodies found." "But why? Wouldn't a secret society want to keep its activities, secret?" Layla pointed to the journal entry about the threshold's opening planned for November 17th, 1945. Whatever ritual Merritt was attempting that night, I don't think it worked the way he expected. The timing matches when he and his daughter suddenly abandoned the house. 2 days after this entry. No further journal entries, no record of them ever returning to the property. She tapped the final carved message she'd found in the basement. "What is sealed between worlds can never truly die." "I think someone believes that uncovering those bodies might finish what Merritt started." Marcus looked skeptical. "That's a lot of speculation based on a cult that disappeared 70 years ago." Then let's find some current evidence," Layla replied, pulling up the missing persons database. "Let's check cases from the past year, focusing on Detroit Metro, patients with serious medical conditions." An hour later, they had identified 5 cases that fit their parameters, all patients with terminal diagnoses who had disappeared without explanation. All had been receiving treatment at various hospitals across Detroit. None had connections to each other, and their disappearances had been attributed to the not uncommon phenomenon of patients leaving to spend their final days on their own terms. "We need to check if any of the attending physicians overlap," Layla said, "or if any are connected to Asclepius Investments." As Marcus compiled the medical records, Layla's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Not all doors should be opened. Walk away from Trumbull Ave. Some knowledge isn't meant for the living." Layla stared at the message, then showed it to Marcus. "Someone doesn't want us investigating. Or someone's trying to scare you off with cryptic warnings," Marcus countered. "Could be a prank. News of the bodies made the papers yesterday." Before Layla could respond, her phone rang again. It was the uniformed officer stationed at the Trumbull Avenue house. "Detective Harrison, you need to get back here. Someone broke through the police line overnight. They've done something to the wall where the bodies were found." "We're on our way," Layla said, already reaching for her coat. As she and Marcus drove toward Trumbull Avenue, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being pulled into something that had been set in motion long before they discovered the bodies, something that had been waiting decades to complete its course. The dining room wall had been further demolished overnight. The opening widened to create a perfect circle, approximately 6 feet in diameter. Around the circular hole, someone had carefully painted the now familiar symbol, the eye above the pyramid, in what appeared to be dark red paint. "That's blood, isn't it?" Marcus asked as the crime scene technician tested the substance. The tech nodded grimly. "Human blood, relatively fresh. We're running it through the database now." Layla studied the precise markings. Unlike the frenzied work of vandals or the hasty desecration typical of trespassers, this had been done with methodical care. The symbol was perfectly proportioned, the circle exact, suggesting the perpetrator had taken their time despite the risk of discovery. "The officer didn't see or hear anything?" she asked. "Says he did his rounds every 30 minutes throughout the night," replied Sergeant Davis, who had responded to the call. "Swears the house was secure at 2 a.m., then found this at 2:30. Security camera on the utility pole across the street was disabled. Someone spray-painted the lens." Layla approached the circular opening, careful not to disturb the evidence technicians dusting for prints. The empty space where the bodies had been entombed now resembled a portal or doorway. She recalled the journal entry. "Tonight, at midnight, we will witness the threshold's opening." "They're recreating whatever Merritt was trying to do in 1945, she murmured. "Who's they?" Marcus asked. Before Layla could answer, her phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "The alignment approaches. 7 points of suffering create the gateway. 6 were found. 1 remains hidden. Stop the 7th, or the door opens permanently." Layla showed Marcus the message. "We need to go back to the basement now." Udim! The underground operating room appeared undisturbed since Layla's visit the previous evening. The examination table with its ominous restraints, the cabinets of dusty medical implements, the drain in the center of the floor. "What exactly are we looking for?" Marcus asked, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. "Merritt's journal mentioned 6 subjects positioned according to the ancient configuration," Layla explained. "We found 6 bodies in the wall, but this message suggests there should be 7 points in total." She directed her light to the symbol carved into the back wall. 7 is significant in many mystical traditions. 7 chakras, 7 deadly sins, 7 stages of alchemical transformation. "So you think there's another body hidden somewhere? Or another victim yet to be taken?" Layla replied, remembering the missing patients with terminal diagnoses. She knelt to examine the floor more carefully, running her fingers along the seam where the wall met the ground. Near the carved symbol, she felt a slight draft, air moving where it shouldn't be. "There's something behind this wall," she said, tapping the stone. It sounded hollow. Marcus helped her search for a mechanism, checking for loose stones or hidden switches. It was Layla who found it, a small depression in the carved eye that yielded to pressure. With a grinding sound, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage beyond. "I'll call for backup," Marcus said, reaching for his radio. "No time," Layla replied, drawing her weapon and flashlight. "If someone's down there, they could be in danger." The passage descended at a gentle angle, the walls changing from stone to earth supported by ancient timbers. The air grew colder and damper as they proceeded, their flashlight beams creating shifting shadows that seemed to move independently around them. After about 50 feet, the tunnel opened into a circular chamber approximately 20 feet in diameter. Unlike the crude passage, this space had been carefully constructed, its walls lined with fitted stone and floor paved with hexagonal tiles. At the center stood a stone altar, and arranged around it in a perfect circle were 7 stone plinths. On 6 of the plinths rested familiar objects, the metal discs bearing the eye and pyramid symbol, one taken from each of the bodies found in the wall. The 7th plinth stood empty. "What the hell is this place?" Marcus whispered, his voice echoing slightly despite the earthen ceiling. "Some kind of ritual chamber," Layla replied, "built beneath the house, probably predating even Merritt's ownership." She examined the altar, which was carved with intricate symbols, similar to but more elaborate than the eye and pyramid. A leather-bound book lay open on the altar's surface. Unlike Merritt's journal, this appeared much older, its pages yellowed and brittle, covered in handwritten text and diagrams. Layla carefully photographed several pages, the flash of her phone momentarily illuminating the chamber's darker recesses. "Layla," Marcus said quietly, directing his flashlight toward the far wall. "Look at this. That's it. What had appeared at first glance to be decorative carvings were actually names, dozens of them etched into the stone along with dates spanning from 1893 to 1945. The last name on the list was Edwin Merritt, followed by the words "failed guardian" and the date of his suicide. "These must be members of the Enlightened Healers Circle," Layla said, "going back to when the house was first built." So Merritt wasn't the originator," Marcus observed. "He was continuing something that had been happening here for decades." A sudden gust of cold air extinguished their flashlights simultaneously, plunging the chamber into darkness. In the same moment, Layla's phone died, despite its full battery moments before. "Marcus," she called out, unable to see even her hand before her face in the absolute blackness. "Right here," he replied from a few feet away. "What just happened?" Before Layla could answer, a faint glow emanated from the center of the room, not from their equipment, but from the empty seventh plinth, which now pulsed with a soft blue luminescence. As they watched, frozen in disbelief, the air above the plinth seemed to ripple, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. The temperature plummeted further, their breath forming clouds in the ethereal light. "We need to leave. Now," Layla said, the rational part of her mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. But as they turned toward the tunnel entrance, a figure blocked their path. A tall, thin woman in a nurse's uniform from another era, her face gaunt and eyes hollow shadows. On her lapel gleamed a familiar pin, the eye above the pyramid. "You've come to witness the completion," said Eliza Merritt, her voice rasping as if long unused. "After all these years, the seventh point will be filled." "You're not real," Layla stated firmly, though her hand instinctively moved to her weapon. "Eliza Merritt died in 1987. The apparition's lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes. "Death is merely a transition, Detective Harrison. A doorway, like the one you've been investigating." Marcus had drawn his gun, though it was clear from his expression that he understood the futility of the gesture. "Whatever you are, we're federal agents. Stand aside." The figure of Eliza flickered slightly, like a television with poor reception. "The alignment wasn't completed in 1945. My father lost his nerve at the critical moment. He couldn't provide the seventh point, the final sacrifice needed to open the gateway permanently. The seventh victim," Layla realized. "He couldn't kill the last person." "Himself," Eliza corrected. "The Guardian must offer their own life force as the keystone. Instead, he sealed the chamber and entombed the others, trapping them between worlds, neither fully dead nor able to cross over." The blue glow from the empty plinth intensified, casting Eliza's gaunt features in sharp relief. Behind her, shadows moved in the tunnel entrance, indistinct forms that seemed to shift between human and something else entirely. "For 70 years I've waited," Eliza continued, "guarding the threshold, preserving the alignment, searching for someone to complete what my father began. Now the stars are properly aligned once more, and you've been drawn here as the final component." Layla's mind raced, connecting fragments of information. The renovation plans specifically targeting the wall where the bodies were hidden, the anonymous text messages warning her away, the blood-painted symbol enlarging the opening. "Asclepius Investments," she said. "The company that purchased this house. You've been influencing events from beyond the grave." Eliza's form shimmered. "Not all members of our circle passed over. Some remain in positions of influence, preparing for this moment across generations. The knowledge waiting beyond the threshold will revolutionize medicine, the ability to transcend death itself." "By torturing people to death," Layla countered, edging slowly toward the tunnel entrance. "That's not medicine, it's murder." "Necessary sacrifice," Eliza insisted. "As you will be, Detective." The shadows behind Eliza solidified, taking the form of 6 figures in hospital gowns. The victims from the wall, their faces contorted in eternal anguish. They moved forward with unnatural, jerking motions. "Run!" Marcus shouted, firing his weapon at the nearest figure. The bullet passed through without effect, the report echoing deafeningly in the confined space. Layla grabbed the ancient book from the altar and bolted toward the tunnel, Marcus close behind. The spectral patients lurched after them, their movements becoming more coordinated with each step, as if remembering how their bodies had once functioned. The spectral patients lurched after them, their movements becoming more coordinated with each step, as if remembering how their bodies had once functioned. The temperature in the tunnel dropped so severely that frost crystallized on the earthen walls as they ran. Layla's lungs burned with each breath of frigid air, the ancient book clutched tightly against her chest. Behind them, Eliza's voice echoed, no longer human, but a distorted cacophony of multiple voices speaking in unison. The circle must be completed, the 7th point must be filled. They emerged into the basement operating room, slamming the hidden door shut behind them. The stone wall ground back into place, momentarily sealing off their pursuers. "That won't hold them," Layla gasped, her breath clouding before her. "We need to get out of this house." Marcus nodded, his face pale with shock. "What the hell did we just see?" "Later," Layla replied, already moving toward the stairs. "First, we—" A violent tremor shook the house, knocking both detectives off balance. Dust and small chunks of plaster rained from the ceiling. From behind the sealed stone door came sounds of scraping, as if multiple hands were clawing at the barrier. They stumbled up the basement stairs and through the first floor, heading for the front door. In the dining room, they were forced to pass the blood-painted circular opening in the wall. As they approached, the air within the circle appeared to ripple and distort, like the surface of water disturbed by an unseen force. "Don't look at it," Layla warned, averting her eyes. "Keep moving." Just as they reached the front hallway, the floor beneath them heaved upward with a thunderous crack. Wooden boards splintered as something forced its way up from below, pale, withered hands breaking through, grasping at their ankles. Marcus fired his weapon at the emerging forms, buying them seconds to reach the front door. They burst outside into the bitter January air, sprinting past the startled officer stationed at the perimeter. "Call for backup!" Layla shouted to him. "Full tactical response!" They didn't stop until they reached their vehicle, parked across the street. Looking back at the house, Layla saw curtains in the upper windows moving, though there was no wind. In one, a pale face pressed against the glass. Not Eliza, but a man with round glasses and a clinical expression. Dr. Edwin Merritt, watching them flee with cold, analytical interest. "We need to destroy that chamber," Layla said, catching her breath. "Whatever's happening in there is accelerating." Marcus stared at her incredulously. "Did you see what I just saw? Those weren't people, Layla. They weren't even ghosts in the traditional sense. They were something in between." "I know what I saw," she replied grimly, "but I also know we can't let whatever is happening in that house continue." She opened the ancient book she'd taken from the altar. Its pages contained diagrams of human anatomy, unlike any medical text, showing not just physical structures, but overlaid patterns of energy or light. Notations in multiple handwritings filled the margins, documenting experiments conducted over decades. "This is their guide," she said. "It explains the alignment they were creating with those bodies. According to this, they believed suffering, specifically prolonged systematic torture, creates energy that can tear openings between dimensions. The 7-point arrangement amplifies this energy, focused through the guardian who serves as the final point. And they want you to be that final point? Why?" Layla turned to a page marked with a symbol matching the medallion she wore. A gift from her grandmother, which she'd always assumed was merely decorative. "Because apparently I'm connected to this somehow. My grandmother's maiden name was Merritt." Marcus's eyes widened. "You're related to these people?" "Distantly. My grandmother never spoke about her family. Now I understand why." Layla's phone buzzed with another text. "Blood calls to blood. The Guardian's line continues through you. Only you can close the door permanently." As tactical response units began arriving, surrounding the property with weapons drawn, Layla studied the book's final pages. They detailed not just the ritual for opening the threshold, but also a method for sealing it permanently, requiring the voluntary sacrifice of someone from the Guardian's bloodline. "I have to go back in there," she said quietly. "Absolutely not," Marcus replied. "We're getting a demolition team to collapse that chamber and bury whatever's down there forever." "It won't work," Layla insisted. "Look at this." She pointed to a passage describing previous attempts to destroy the chamber. "The house repairs itself. The chamber reconstitutes. It's happened before, after fires and partial demolitions. There's only one way to end this permanently." Before Marcus could argue further, an officer approached their vehicle. "Detectives, you need to see this." And on his phone was a live news feed showing aerial footage of 1837 Trumbull Avenue. What caught Layla's attention wasn't the police response, but the house itself, now surrounded by a faint, shimmering distortion, visible even on camera. As they watched, a news reporter at the scene suddenly clutched her head in pain, blood visibly seeping from her ears before the broadcast cut out. "It's spreading," Layla said. "Whatever's being channeled through that opening is beginning to affect the surrounding area." She made her decision, checking her weapon and pocketing the lighter from Marcus's coat. "I'm going back in. If I'm not out in 20 minutes, order the tactical team to burn the place to the ground." "Layla, this is insane," Marcus protested. "You can't sacrifice yourself based on some cult's deranged writings." "I'm not planning to die today," she replied, though the certainty in her voice was forced. "But someone with Merritt's blood has to close what they started. There's no other option." Before he could stop her, Layla was moving toward the house, ducking under the police tape. Officers called out warnings that she ignored, her focus entirely on the Victorian structure that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. As she stepped onto the porch, the front door swung open on its own. The interior of the house had transformed in the brief time since their escape. The wallpaper now appeared fresh and vibrant, the hardwood floors gleaming as if recently polished. Electric lamps cast a warm glow throughout the first floor, though Layla knew the power had been disconnected for decades. The house wasn't just repairing itself, it was reverting to how it had appeared during Merritt's time. Layla moved cautiously toward the dining room, the ancient book tucked into her jacket. According to its final pages, the ritual to seal the threshold required the blood of the Guardian's line, freely given, along with the destruction of the 7 metal discs that anchored the alignment. The circular opening in the wall now emitted a pulsing blue light, identical to what they'd seen in the underground chamber. The blood-painted symbol surrounding it seemed to writhe subtly, as if alive. "I know why you've come, great-granddaughter." Dr. Edwin Merritt stood beside the opening, his form translucent, but growing more solid with each pulse of light. He appeared exactly as he had in the photographs from 1945, distinguished, clinical, with eyes that betrayed no emotion. "You're not real," Layla stated, though with less conviction than before. "I exist in the space between realities," Merritt replied, "as does my daughter and our subjects. For 70 years, we've waited at the threshold, unable to fully cross in either direction. Because you couldn't complete your sick experiment," Layla said. "You couldn't sacrifice yourself as the final point." Merritt's expression hardened. "I glimpsed what waited beyond the threshold, what we would become if we crossed over completely. It was not what we expected. So you sealed it up and left your victims trapped in between." "I tried to reverse the process," he insisted. "But once begun, the alignment could only be completed or suspended, never undone. So I walled them away, hoping the knowledge would die with me." He gestured to the circular opening. "Now others have discovered our work and seek to finish it." "Asclepius Investments," Layla said. "Your remaining followers." "Not followers, competitors. A splinter group from our circle who embraced a more radical approach. They've spent decades searching for this chamber, believing the knowledge beyond the threshold will grant them power over life and death itself." Another tremor shook the house. more violent than before. Through the circular opening, Layla caught glimpses of another reality, a landscape of twisted, impossible architecture beneath a sky of churning darkness. "It's destabilizing," Merritt warned. "The alignment was designed to open a controlled gateway, but after decades of being suspended between states, the barrier has weakened. If the seventh point isn't filled properly, the threshold will collapse, merging our reality with what lies beyond. And that would be bad," Layla concluded. "Catastrophic. What exists there cannot exist here without transforming everything it touches." Already its influence seeps through. As if to illustrate his point, the walls around them momentarily rippled like liquid before re-solidifying. "I need to get to the chamber," Layla said. "To destroy the discs." Merritt nodded toward the dining room floor, which had split open to reveal a direct passage downward. "They're waiting for you. My daughter believes you've come to complete what I could not, to serve as the seventh point. And you, what do you believe?" The ghost of Edwin Merritt regarded her with something approaching regret. "I believe my work has caused enough suffering. But blood calls to blood, Detective Harrison. The choice you make in that chamber will be your own." He faded from view as another tremor rocked the house. Without hesitation, Layla descended through the opening in the floor, dropping directly into the underground chamber. It had changed since her last visit. The 7 stone plinths now formed a perfect circle around the altar, which glowed with the same blue light as the wall opening. 6 of the plinths held their metal discs, each pulsing in rhythm with the altar. The spectral forms of the 6 victims stood at their respective positions around the circle, their expressions vacant. And at the empty 7th plinth waited Eliza Merritt, more solid now, her nurse's uniform pristine against her gaunt frame. "You've come to complete the circle," Eliza said, her voice echoing strangely, "to finish what my father could not." "I've come to end this," Layla replied, moving carefully around the perimeter of the room. "To free these people you've kept trapped for 70 years. Eliza laughed, the sound sharp and discordant. "Free them. They are vessels now, conduits for what waits beyond. Their suffering carved the initial opening. Their essence maintains it." The chamber shuddered, dust falling from the ceiling. The blue light intensified, casting harsh shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. "The threshold weakens," Eliza continued. "What my father feared will soon emerge with or without the 7th point. But with you, with the Guardian's blood, we can control the opening, direct the power that flows through." "And what exactly is waiting to come through?" Layla asked, stalling as she positioned herself near the altar. "Knowledge, power, entities that understand the true nature of life and death. They will transform medicine, transform humanity itself." Another violent tremor, stronger than before. Cracks appeared in the chamber walls, revealing glimpses of the same alien landscape Layla had seen through the dining room opening. "Your father saw what was really waiting," Layla said. "That's why he couldn't go through with it. Why he sealed everything away." Doubt flickered across Eliza's spectral features. "He lost his nerve, the opportunity of centuries, and he threw it away out of fear." "Not fear," came Edwin Merritt's voice as his form materialized beside the altar. "Understanding. What waits beyond the threshold doesn't wish to share knowledge, Eliza. It wishes to consume, to transform our reality into an extension of its own." "You're wrong, Father," Eliza hissed, her form distorting with anger. "The circle's work was too important to abandon. I've guided new disciples prepared for this moment for decades. And in doing so, you've weakened the barrier beyond repair," Merritt replied. "The threshold will collapse unless it's properly sealed." Layla saw her opportunity as the 2 spirits confronted each other. In one swift motion, she lunged for the altar, sweeping her arm across its surface to scatter the metal discs from their plinths. "No!" Eliza shrieked, her form elongating unnaturally as she moved to intercept. Layla managed to knock 3 of the discs to the floor before Eliza reached her. The spectral nurse's hands closed around Layla's throat with impossible strength, lifting her off the ground. The temperature plummeted wherever Eliza's form touched Layla's skin, the cold burning like fire. The alignment must be completed. Eliza's voice had changed, overlaid with other voices, speaking in unison. The trapped victims, Layla realized, their consciousness subsumed into Eliza's purpose. With her remaining strength, Layla pulled her grandmother's medallion from her neck and pressed it against Eliza's spectral form. The simple metal disc, identical to those on the plinths but never used in the original ritual, flared with sudden heat. Eliza recoiled, her form momentarily disrupted. In that instant, Layla broke free, gasping for breath as she stumbled toward the remaining discs. The chamber convulsed around them, the cracks in the walls widening to reveal more of the alien landscape beyond. Through them, Layla glimpsed vast shapes moving against that impossible horizon, entities of impossible geometry shifting toward the weakening barrier. With desperation born of understanding what was at stake, Layla swept the remaining discs from their plinths. As the last one clattered to the floor, she drew her knife, slicing her palm and letting her blood, the blood of Merit's line, drip onto the ancient book she'd placed on the altar. "Blood freely given," she recited from memory. "To close what blood has opened." The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The blue light surged to blinding intensity as the chamber began to collapse inward. The spectral forms of the 6 victims seemed to dissolve, their expressions changing from vacant to peaceful as they were finally released. Eliza's scream of rage transformed into a howl of inhuman frequencies as her form was pulled toward the fracturing barriers between worlds. "What have you done?" "Finished what my great-grandfather started," Layla replied, backing toward the tunnel entrance. "Ending the alignment permanently." The chamber shuddered violently, stones falling from the ceiling as the entire structure began to implode. The glimpses of the alien landscape receded, the cracks sealing themselves with each drop of Layla's blood that touched the ancient text. Edwin Merritt's form appeared beside her, more transparent now but oddly peaceful. The threshold closes. "My work dies with me, as it should have 70 years ago." "What about the others?" Layla asked. "Your victims?" "Free," Merritt replied simply. "As I will be. As Eliza would have been, had she chosen differently." Eliza's form was being drawn inexorably toward the collapsing center of the chamber, her features contorting between human and something else entirely. "Father!" she cried out, momentarily lucid. "Help me!" Merritt reached toward his daughter, their spectral hands almost touching before both were pulled into the imploding vortex where the altar had stood. Layla didn't wait to see more. She sprinted for the tunnel as the chamber collapsed behind her, the ancient stones that had channeled so much suffering finally crumbling to dust. 3 days later, Layla stood across the street from the vacant lot where 1837 Trumbull Avenue had once stood. Nothing remained of the Victorian house, not a foundation stone, not a splinter of wood. After her escape from the collapsing chamber, the entire structure had seemed to fold in upon itself, leaving only a depression in the earth that had since been filled with gravel. The official report listed structural collapse due to age and neglect as the cause. The bodies discovered in the wall were documented as cold case homicides from the 1940s, now closed with the identification of Dr. Edwin Merritt as the perpetrator. No mention was made of underground chambers, spectral apparitions, or thresholds between worlds. Some things couldn't be explained within the confines of official paperwork. "You sure you're okay?" Marcus asked, handing her a coffee as he joined her at the chain-link fence now surrounding the property. Layla nodded, though the truth was more complicated. The cut on her palm had healed with unusual speed, leaving a scar in the shape of a small circle. Nightmares of alien landscapes and watching eyes plagued her sleep, and sometimes, in mirrors or reflective surfaces, she caught glimpses of faces that shouldn't be there. Merritt, Eliza, the 6 victims, watching her with expressions she couldn't interpret. The FBI finished their investigation into Asclepius Investments, Marcus continued when she didn't elaborate. Shell company leading back to a private medical research group called the Threshold Institute. Let me guess, they've all disappeared. Offices emptied, records erased, principals vanished. Classic cult behavior when their plans fall apart. Layla sipped her coffee, unsurprised. They'll resurface eventually under a different name. The promise of that kind of power doesn't just fade away. What power? Control over death. Immortality. Marcus shook his head. After what we saw, you still think that's what was waiting on the other side? No, Layla admitted. I think Merritt was right. Whatever was there wanted to consume, not share. The knowledge was just the bait. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as city workers continued clearing the site. Soon there would be nothing left to suggest the horror that had unfolded there, both 70 years ago and in the present. I requested a transfer, Layla said finally. Cold case unit. There are other unsolved murders with that symbol involved, going back decades, across multiple states. Marcus looked concerned. You sure that's wise? After everything that happened? Someone needs to find them, Marcus. The remaining members of the Circle or the Threshold Institute, or whatever they're calling themselves now. They'll try again. Different location, different method, but the same goal. And you think you're the one to stop them because of your connection to Merritt? Layla touched the circular scar on her palm. Blood calls to blood, she said quietly. I can track them in ways others can't. She didn't tell him about the dreams, vivid visions of other houses, other chambers, other victims arranged in different configurations. Or about the whispering voices that sometimes reached her at the edge of sleep, guiding her toward hidden knowledge. The ancient book she'd taken from the chamber now resided in a safety deposit box, its contents partially translated and documented in her private notes. Within its pages were references to other sites, other thresholds, some sealed, some still active. Just be careful, Marcus said, clearly unconvinced but knowing better than to argue. Whatever happened in that house, it changed you, Layla. She nodded, unable to deny it. The blood she'd given to seal the threshold had forged a connection, not to what waited beyond, but to the barrier itself. She could feel it now, a constant awareness of places where the membrane between worlds grew thin. As they turned to leave, Layla cast one final glance at the empty lot. For just a moment, she thought she saw the Victorian house standing intact, Dr. Edwin Merritt watching from an upstairs window with an expression of grim warning. Then it was gone, leaving only vacant space and the certainty that some doors, once discovered, could never be completely closed again. 1 month later, Layla sat alone in her apartment, surrounded by case files spread across her dining table. Her transfer to the cold case unit had been approved with surprising speed, along with her request to focus on unsolved murders with ritualistic elements, particularly those involving the now familiar eye and pyramid symbol. What she'd found confirmed her suspicions. Since the 1890s, similar cases had occurred across the country. Bodies discovered in unusual arrangements, often in locations that were subsequently destroyed by fire or other accidents. The connecting threads were subtle but unmistakable to someone who knew what to look for. References to medical experimentation, 7-point configurations, and victims with terminal illnesses. The enlightened healer's circle had been operating far longer and more extensively than she'd initially believed. Layla rubbed her eyes, fatigue settling deep in her bones. Sleep had become a luxury, interrupted by dreams that felt more like visitations. In them, Edwin Merritt often appeared, sometimes warning her away from certain investigations, sometimes guiding her toward others. Whether these were actual communications from beyond or manifestations of her subconscious, she couldn't be certain. The circular scar on her palm occasionally throbbed in proximity to certain locations or objects. It had led her to a storage unit containing journals from a Circle member active in the 1970s, and to a retired nurse who had worked with Eliza Merritt but escaped the cult's influence. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, the same one that had contacted her during the Trumbull Avenue investigation, Chicago, Kenwood District, the old Fitzpatrick Sanitarium. They found another configuration. Layla had given up trying to trace these messages. They bounced through too many proxies, their origin impossible to pinpoint. Instead, she'd come to view them as another resource, another connection forged by her blood's interaction with the threshold. She began researching the Fitzpatrick Sanitarium immediately, finding references to a private mental health facility operational from 1903 to 1967. Its founder, Dr. James Fitzpatrick, had studied briefly under Edwin Merritt before establishing his own practice, specializing in transcendent therapy for patients with treatment-resistant conditions. The facility had been shuttered after a patient died during an experimental procedure, though details were suspiciously sparse in public records. The building had remained abandoned for decades before being purchased recently by Layla felt a chill of recognition. Asclepius Holdings, a subsidiary of the same parent company that had owned Trumbull Restoration LLC. They were starting again. Different location, different name, but the same purpose. Layla booked a flight to Chicago for the following morning. As she packed, her gaze fell on the ancient book retrieved from Merritt's chamber, which she'd brought home from the safety deposit box to continue translating. She'd discovered that what she'd initially taken for a cult manual was actually something far older, a record of encounters with the entities that existed beyond the thresholds. Some passages appeared to have been written in altered states of consciousness, the handwriting changing drastically mid-sentence, the language shifting between recognizable English and something far less human. One section had particularly haunted her, a warning written by what appeared to be Edwin Merritt himself, though the date preceded his birth by decades. To those who carry the Guardian's blood, you are both key and lock to the doors between worlds. Your presence activates the threshold. Your sacrifice can seal it, but beware. What waits beyond recognizes your lineage. It will call to you, speak through others to reach you, offer knowledge beyond mortal understanding. Each time you use your blood to seal a threshold, the connection strengthens. Eventually, you become a threshold yourself. Layla touched the circular scar on her palm, wondering how much of herself had been altered by what happened in that chamber. How much of what drove her now was her own determination to stop the circle, and how much was something else working through her. As if in response to her thoughts, the lights in her apartment flickered momentarily. In the brief darkness, she thought she glimpsed a figure standing in the corner of her living room, not Merritt or Eliza, but one of the entities she'd glimpsed through the fracturing barriers. A form that seemed to fold in upon itself in ways that defied physical geometry, with too many angles and too few dimensions simultaneously. When the light stabilized, the corner was empty, but a subtle change in air pressure suggested she was no longer alone. "I know you're watching," she said to the apparently empty room. "I know you're waiting. But whatever doorway they're creating in Chicago, I'm going to shut it down." No voice answered, but the temperature dropped several degrees. On the table, pages of her case files ruffled as if stirred by an unfelt breeze, stopping at a photograph of the Fitzpatrick Sanitarium. Beside it, her pen moved a fraction of an inch, pointing to a particular window on the building's third floor. Message received. Layla finished packing, adding her service weapon and the small medallion that had once belonged to her grandmother. The connection to Merritt's bloodline was both her vulnerability and her strength in the struggle ahead. The threshold entities recognized her, were drawn to her, could potentially influence her, but that same connection gave her the power to sense and seal their attempted incursions. As she prepared to leave for the airport, Layla glanced back at her apartment, at the case files, the ancient book, the subtle signs of unworldly presence that had become part of her daily existence. She understood now what Edwin Merritt had realized too late. Some knowledge came at too high a price. Some doors were never meant to be opened. But as long as the enlightened Healers Circle and their successors continued their work, continued creating configurations and sacrificing victims in their pursuit of forbidden knowledge, someone had to stand at the threshold. Someone had to be the guardian. Blood calls to blood. The mantle had passed to her, whether she had chosen it or not. In Chicago, another chamber waited. Another alignment neared completion. Another doorway threatened to open between worlds. And Layla Harrison, carrying the legacy of both Merritt's sin and his final redemption, would be there to close it.